And now I'd like to welcome to the program Andrew Tettenborn, law professor at Swansea University. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
Now, as we've been talking about, Adam Bodnar is in Brussels along with Adam Slapka. They're in Brussels to address the issue of closing Article 7. Now, Article 7 was never enacted, and just for context for our viewers, Article 7 would have suspended voting rights within the European Union due to previous reforms to the judiciary, which were considered illegitimate by Brussels and not adhering to the rule of law. So I guess the question is this big news for the Polish coalition, which is trying to bring back the rule of law to Poland, that they're trying to close this procedure there in Brussels?
I have a horrible feeling, it isn't very big news indeed. It strikes me that this decision to withdraw the Article 7 procedures, which I think was effectively foreshadowed by Vera Jourova, the deputy chief of the European Commission, I think it was very much a foregone conclusion. I think the Article 7 procedure was very much aimed at the previous Polish government. Donald Tusk has been very pro-European. He's been very conciliatory towards Brussels, and I think it was fairly obvious that Article 7 proceedings were going to be withdrawn. There are two other points to make about Article 7. One is that it's a very difficult procedure to operate. I've a suspicion that when it was first introduced, it was put there very much as a matter of window dressing, and nobody really gave much thought to how it was going to operate in practice. And of course, it was very difficult to operate when both Poland and Hungary were guarding each other's backs, because it has to be unanimous. And I think the other thing that has to be recognized is that Article 7 is actually a very political part of the EU treaties. When it refers to such matters as the rule of law, this is never particularly carefully defined. I think it was seen right from the beginning as a way in which an ultimate political sanction could be used against countries who made life very difficult for Brussels. And I have no doubt that the authorities in Brussels are rather relieved that they no longer have to worry too much about the minutiae of Article 7. But that's merely the impression I get.
Well, just working on your impressions, we know that crucial to the events that are happening today and tomorrow are these plans that Justice Minister Bodnar presented in February. And obviously the formalities are going to be completed tomorrow. The plans are crucial to closing these procedures. Are you able to tell us a little bit about those plans and how they've actually changed the status that Poland has in the eyes of the European Commission?
Well, I think the plans, and in particular the 9 pieces of legislation which have been put forward by the Donald Tusk government, are to deal with what was seen as the problems of the Constitutional Tribunal and the appointment of judges. Now, clearly, they are regarded as highly important, at least in principle, to Article 7. I suspect probably that unless something very peculiar happens, Article 7 proceedings will be withdrawn anyway. You're quite right that the plans are not absolutely guaranteed to succeed. There are 2 things which I suspect Donald Tusk is rather worried about. One of them is, of course, a possible veto by Andrzej Duda. Which is possible, and indeed I understand may just be on the cards. The other problem is that as soon as you have a government which introduces legislation to change the composition of the Constitutional Tribunal, there may be a risk that the old Constitutional Tribunal will itself attack the legislation as unconstitutional. But those are two problems which I think we can wait for at this stage. There's an old English saying that you cross a bridge only when you come to it, because you might not have to cross it at all.
Yes, and we have the Minister of European Affairs, Adam Szlapka. Now he attended a conference on where they spoke about the concept of the rule of law and liberal democracies. So let's take a listen to one of his statements that he said for further discussion.
Today we are discussing the rule of law, which had evoked in recent years so many heated emotions, especially in Poland, because it is in my country that the rule of law came under real threat and risk being eliminated by the authoritarian populists. However, our discussion about the rule of law should also concern a wider range of topics, because it should also be a discussion about values, discussion about human rights, and a discussion about the safety and security of our citizens. That it should be a discussion about liberal democracy as such. There is no doubt in my mind that all these themes are interconnected. You cannot have liberal democracy without rule of law. Without rule of law, there is no liberal democracy. Without liberal democracy, there is no freedom. The rule of law is a precondition of the freedom of each and every one of us. Today, we know full well that Francis Fukuyama couldn't have been more wrong when he announced the end of history. In fact, he later admitted to committing an error of judgment, because the events we are witnessing in the United States, in Europe, and in Poland only prove how mistaken he was.
Now, Mr. Tettenborn, you mentioned how vague the concept of the rule of law can be within the use of Article 7 and the European Union using it. But really, would you say it would be fair to say that the whole uproar concerning these changes, these reforms to the judiciary that were enacted by the Law and Justice government, were because the reforms were done by passing a simple law instead of amending the Constitution? Do you believe that if, in fact, there was a big enough majority to make those reforms and amend the Constitution, we probably wouldn't be having this debate here today?
That's a very good point. I'm not necessarily sure that it's right, because certainly if you look at it from the point of view of the European Union has always taken the view that European law, the law of the European Union, must prevail even over national constitutions. And indeed, I think one of the complaints made against Poland, and I believe also possibly against Hungary, was the suggestion that a national constitution might actually prevail over the law produced by Brussels. And this is a problem in a number of European Union countries. Some have said in their own constitutions that EU law prevails anyway, notably Ireland. But I'm not sure if it necessarily would have solved the problems in the way you've suggested.
Well, potentially it could have been given maybe a little bit more legitimacy to those reforms, but a very good point about the Constitution, or at least that interpretation of the Constitution superseding European Union law. Well, sir, Mr. Andrew Tettenborn, law professor at Swansea University, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.